All right. Good morning and welcome to focus group number 3 for San Benito County. My name is Mike Houston with DKS Associates. I'm the project manager on this really cool project. It's really cool because it's helping to electrify the entire Central Coast, of which San Benito is one of 6 counties. And we've been holding a series of these focus groups with each of the counties. And yesterday we also had a focus group with the utilities and the community choice aggregators to talk about some of the power issues. So I am going to go to the next slide if I can figure out how to do that. Come on, there it is. Good. Here's our agenda. So the most of today's focus group is really focusing on discussions and getting input from you, members of San Benito County. And so before we get started, maybe we should go through a quick round of introductions. I've already introduced myself. I'm from DKS Associates, and maybe so why don't we start with Sarkis and Maya, since you guys are kind of leading this effort for SBK.
Thanks,
Morning,
Mike.
everybody. Oh, go ahead, Maya.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Maya. I'm a planner at SBCAG, and we're sort of spearheading the ZEV strategy with SLOCOG and AMPAC.
Hi, Regina. Hi, Veronica. Sarkis with SBCAG.
Hello. I'll introduce myself. So Regina Valentine, I'm a planner at Samuel. Well, I do planning for 2 agencies under one roof, the Council of Governments as well as the Local Transportation Authority. So my main function is overseeing the public transit.
Good morning,
everyone. For
everyone.
San Benito County, I should say.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Regina. Hi, good morning, everyone. Veronica Lezama, Transportation Planning Manager for the COG.
Excellent. Is there anyone else here today from San Benito County? Because Sarah and Ilse are both from DKS Associates. Sarah, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Mike. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah. I will be helping with note-taking today. I recently joined DKS about 3 months ago, but previously I worked for a public utility for almost 7 years and did about 5 years of transportation electrification. So not new to the subject matter, but new to DKS. Happy to be here.
Great. And I don't know if you're actually on Ilse or just here in spirit to help facilitate this. I wasn't sure. So okay.
I just wanted to quickly introduce myself. I'm a community engagement specialist with DKS Associates, as Mike mentioned, and I'm helping do the outreach efforts for this project. So you constantly get emails from me. But yeah, that's who I am.
Thank you, Ilse, and thanks for helping set this thing up. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the public involvement in a couple of slides. But first, what I want to talk about is why we're doing this. So the why is really important, we think. Basically, this was funded by Caltrans, and their expectation is that a lot of the ZEV planning has already been conducted, that zero emission vehicle, and has been conducted within the urban areas. And so the state is very interested in making sure that the unincorporated areas are addressed as well, especially to meet the needs of interregional travel, because it's great if you can charge your EV in the city, but what if you're on a long distance trip and you need to charge somewhere else? So that's something that I think the state is concerned with. So that's why Caltrans funded this. At least that's my assumption. Another objective is to figure out, what do we need to do to address the challenges and the gaps? And so a big part of today's discussion is really to get an understanding from you, representatives from San Benito County, what is holding electromobility back, that is transportation electrification back in your region, and how can we address the needs of interregional travelers, for motorists, as well as regional transit. One of you mentioned that you move the transit, and also for goods movement, for freight and so forth. So it's not just for light duty vehicles, it's also for other types of vehicles that will rely on alternative zero emission transportation technologies. The third goal, of course, is social equity. And so we want to make sure that we are addressing, actually it's third and fourth goals, are meeting the needs of disadvantaged populations, those who have not necessarily shared in the electromobility revolution to date. And I'll talk about that and show a slide that explains this a little bit more. But we want to make sure that the underserved populations, traditionally underserved populations, are served in a move to not just to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but one of the benefits of alternative transportation that is alternative fuel transportation, is better air quality. And then another goal is to make sure that we're identifying infrastructure improvements, related investments, policies, and implementation strategies to promote zero emission vehicle infrastructure adoption. So if you are doing something in San Benito County that is working well, we want to know about it, because there may be some examples that you might be able to share with us that we can implement region-wide. And then certainly last but not least is how to get this project funded. So we want to make sure that as a result of this effort, we position the entire region for funding opportunities. And there's a number of different funding opportunities at the federal, state, and local level. So for example, yesterday we were meeting with utilities, as I mentioned, and they all have various incentives for both vehicles, electric vehicles, as well as charging infrastructure. So those would be examples of the kind of things we're looking for. And if there's things going on locally that we should be aware of, that's certainly something we want to be able to address in the plan. And Sarah's going to be taking ferocious notes. This is the first of 3 focus groups in a row. So her wrists and fingers are fresh today, but by the end of, by lunchtime today, she's going to be cursing me. Actually, she's going to be cursing Ilse, because Ilse organized this. So I'm going to put this one on you, Ilse. Okay, we have, as Ilse mentioned, she is leading our outreach, and we have a very robust outreach program. We've got a couple of virtual, because this is a huge region. So, and you know, there was a pandemic when we started the project. So maybe there still is. I'm not sure. I'm working from home. I never leave anymore. But you know, we have this virtual program to help solicit input from key stakeholders, from the general public, and of course from our partners such as San Benito County. So this is a map of the content of that website, and there is a URL on the screen here, and hopefully Sarah can, or Ilse can share this in the chat as well, because I can't type that fast. In addition to our website, we also have this thing called Social Pinpoint. Social Pinpoint is an interactive mapping tool that allows anybody who's interested in this project to offer opinions or information that we might not have. So we've completed the existing conditions report, which basically summarizes where the existing chargers are, and also, kind of localized road conditions and travel patterns and those kinds of issues. So that sets the baseline for the project. And so, take a look at that, and that's posted on the website. And I gave, the URL, the first one, and you can download a PDF of that and read it. It's a really good read. I highly recommend it. You've got a weekend coming up. Great thing to do this weekend is to read the existing conditions report. And then when you find things that might not, there may be information that has changed since we put that out. We wrote it mostly in June, so things may have changed. Or if you have ideas for additional chargers or additional programs that we should be aware of, this is a great, very interactive way for you to provide input. For us, we're going to incorporate this information into our analysis. This is what the form looks like on Social Pinpoint. So you can click on a site and then leave us a comment. You can add a photograph. It's really cool tool. We highly recommend it. Again, great thing to do on a rainy weekend. I'm in Seattle. It's going to rain all weekend. I don't know. It's going to be probably going to be perfect in Central Coast. You probably got better things to do. But if you don't, go to the Social Pinpoint, go to the website, and read that existing conditions report. And if you do, you'll find this chart. This chart summarizes all of the different existing chargers within the entire region. And as you can see, San Benito County by far has the fewest chargers of any of the other counties. So I don't know if it qualifies as what we might call a charging desert, but clearly compared to the rest of the region, there's fewer chargers. For example, Tesla doesn't even know San Benito exists, according to this chart. And Tesla is, they're trying to put out chargers where they can sell vehicles, and so that's their purpose. But even the level 2 chargers and the DC fast chargers are in short supply. The areas within the parentheses are those within 1 mile of a highway interchange in an unincorporated area, which again is the focus of this study area. So there's only 3 in that, and the reason those have been identified is those would be most appropriate for NEVI funding. But for interregional travel, that's where most people are going to want to charge, because they're not going to want to drive too far off a freeway if they need electricity. And so that's kind of what this chart is. And I'll show you a more detailed chart for San Benito County in a minute. Oh, here it is. So this chart, because of the way we did the mapping and the geography of the Central Coast, we put both San Benito and Santa Cruz County on the same map. As you can see, there's a chart on the upper right, which is your county, San Benito County, which is a little bit more detail of the data that I just showed. On the lower left is Santa Cruz County. As you can see, Santa Cruz has far more chargers, an insanely high number of Tesla superchargers. It's one of the probably the highest concentrations of any county in the world for for Tesla superchargers. But San Benito County is definitely lacking, and we want to make sure that under this plan, that this deficit of chargers gets addressed. The other thing, as I mentioned, we're focusing on the 1 mile buffers of county interchanges, and this is a map that shows that. The yellow is the incorporated areas, but the focus on this project is really the unincorporated areas. So you can see there is quite a bit of area within these interchanges that are outside the urban areas. So this is really where we're focusing on. So starting with the next slide, I want to discuss with you how we can help address this lack of charging. So the first question is, we need to make sure that we're up to date on things. So the data that I've been showing is existing chargers that are currently operational on the ground. That all comes from the Alternatives Fuel Data Center, and also with a little bit of help from PlugShare, which is a crowdsourced third-party data platform on a smartphone, and that's where drivers will go to find charging. But if there's things that are, there's charging infrastructure that is being planned for San Benito County, we may not be aware of that. So you might be, hopefully you can inform us so we can get that into our plan.
Yeah, this is Veronica. Unfortunately, I don't believe there's any infrastructure that is being planned in San Benito County. A few years back, the county of San Benito did install some EV charging stations at some of their county facilities. But other than that, I'm not aware of any other projects. And I know, Regina, you're going to be looking at electrifying the transit fleet, and that is something that is going to happen because it's a requirement. Is that correct, Regina?
Yeah, we have to provide a rollout plan on going zero emission to the California Air Resources Board by June of 2023. And unfortunately, seeing as that I am the planning staff, both short-term and long-term operations, all the way up to the next 20 years for the agency, I have not even begun to dig into that. And I'm actually planning to apply for a Caltrans planning grant, the same funding source that for this, for this effort here, to prepare an actual full, thorough infrastructure plan on how exactly we're going to do zero emission. I even the basics, I don't even know hydrogen versus electric. I don't know. so like Veronica's saying, it's definitely, and even based off of the information you had on that map, definitely the planning hasn't been really here in San Benito County for going zero emission, both
Regina,
transit and otherwise.
Yeah, it would be helpful if with this plan, we can get some more guidance. I know some of the other transit agencies, I believe MST does have a couple, or I'm not sure if all of their fleet is electrified, but getting some of those resources would be beneficial, especially for the smaller counties, so we can kind of piggyback on what the bigger counties are working on and how they're rolling out their plan.
Well, I think though this effort here is more so about personal vehicles, if I'm not mistaken, versus transit. But there might be something that also MST is looking at for their own, maybe smaller vehicles or whatnot.
So the focus really is on. I shouldn't say the focus. I would say transit is part of the scope, but the majority of the effort is looking at chargers that serve multiple users. And so transit is usually a special use case. And the reason for that is, well, part of it has to do with FTA requirements. So FTA has its own, doesn't want to provide funding to non-transit use, such as the public or freight. But part of that has to do with a transit agency needs to have dedicated infrastructure so that they can guarantee that they can charge. So typically the way transit buses are electrified is by charging overnight at the depot, supplemented by, oftentimes, depending on the length of the route and the service block design, on route. So there may be opportunity charging on route, typically at a layover facility, or ideally at a layover facility that's also a passenger facility. And so we do have a summary, and I didn't mention this, but since the transit is your focus, I should mention that we have an existing conditions study separate from the overall existing conditions report, strictly focused on transit. And I don't know if that's up on the website yet. I think it's just, if it's not up yet, it will be very soon. So definitely check that out. And that presents a summary of kind of where things are at. That said, one of the focuses of this project is where chargers could serve multiple users, potentially interregional transit. So for example, if you've got a long distance route that might serve another transit system within the same geography. So let's say San Benito and Santa Cruz counties wanted to share a layover charger at the terminus of the two counties to serve both. That could be something that we could address as part of this plan. The other thing I should mention, and I'm embarrassed to do this, but I am a consultant. We do this kind of work. Let us know if we can help. And with that, I'm going to turn it back I want to follow up with Veronica. You mentioned that in a couple of years ago, the county had put some charging facilities. Are those for county fleet vehicles, or are those for the public?
Those are for county fleet vehicles.
Okay, so those would not show up in the
Yeah, you're right.
data center. So okay.
Yeah, correct.
And are those behind a fence?
I believe they are. I'm not too sure.
At the admin building, they're not, because they're out
Oh, okay.
behind, where like Shirley Parks and stuff, like in that area.
Oh,
Sorry,
okay.
that we're
In the
talking-
back.
Yeah. So they're visible to the public.
But they're designated county parking spots, I believe. Are they? Maybe not.
I don't know how well enforced, but yes, I'm sure they are.
So one of the things we do a lot of is fleet electrification, and in many cases, the charging infrastructure can be shared between multiple users. So, for example, the most typical other user other than fleet vehicles are county or city employees, because in theory, the municipal fleet is out on the road being used during the day, which makes those chargers available, which is at the same time when staff happen to be parked there. So one way to do that is to make those available to the public. Then sometimes at nights and more on weekends, I guess, those can be made available to the public. So that is something that can be done technologically. Some agencies have gift of service requirements that make that challenging. The workaround, of course, is to require payment for that so that it can serve as a revenue stream. Also provide, access to the public. Again, it depends on where they're located. So, if you have any information on those that you can share with us, it might be worth at least addressing, and we'd be happy to discuss that with you if there's time today. I want to make sure we get through our agenda, but that's certainly a potential opportunity, since there is some charging capacity on the ground at county facilities. And I assume those are in urban areas, though, right? Those facilities are probably not in the unincorporated area.
Yeah, correct. Urban areas.
Okay. All right. Okay. Any other charging infrastructure investments that are planned that we should be aware of?
Nope.
Okay. So let's talk about incentives. What would help? Money.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges for San Benito County is that we're number 2 county in the state with the highest commutes. So we have the most super commuters out of the state. Again, we're number 2. And so nearly half of our residents commute outside the county for employment. So I imagine one of the challenges being that, that the vehicle must be a long range, type of vehicle, or we need to have more facilities located along, along those critical routes. However, already with the 90+ minute commutes, I don't know how EV will help with reducing some of those times. I guess that's probably one of the challenges. But how can it help? I'm sure it's extremely helpful, as it's zero emissions, and we definitely want to support any electrification of the public vehicles, or and supporting that effort. But I guess that's part of our challenge.
Yeah,
And
to
so I'm
kind of add
hoping-
to that, yeah, Veronica, if I could add, just like you're mentioning, the 90-minute commute, a lot of it's in stop and go traffic. So all that's hard on the the electric vehicle charging and all that. So trying to factor in a place to charge when you're already driving 90 minutes to work, and then whatever it takes, yeah, it's definitely a pickle.
Well, the obvious answer is the workplace charging at the destination, which of course would be outside San Benito County. However, if those workplaces are elsewhere within our study area boundaries, such as in Santa Barbara, that might be worth mentioning. So do you have origin destination data on those super commutes?
We do have it for counties, but not specific employer locations.
So if you could share that, that would be really helpful, because again, if it's within our study area boundary, I would think that would be something we should discuss, at least, not necessarily identifying, and frankly, it's outside the scope to say, okay, these workplaces need this number of chargers. But I think we could say, within, say, Santa Barbara County, or San Luis Obispo County, there's a need for workplace charging, especially for supercommuters in the region. And I do know that this is a very expensive area, as a cost of living is very high there. So that does drive supercommuters. And I will say this also, if ever there was a good use case for an electric vehicle, it's a supercommuter. And the reason for that is electric vehicles make the most sense when you drive the most, because the biggest savings comes from reduced fuel costs as well as reduced maintenance costs. So it really makes the most sense from an economic perspective on a total cost of ownership basis for people that travel a long distance. So I think this is a really, really good place where drivers from San Benito County, long distance commuters, should really be driving electric vehicles. And so I think if workplace charging outside the county is one way to address that, and then residential charging within the county certainly makes sense, and that's something we will be addressing. And then the third alternative, not as good as either of those, is public charging that can support those folks. So that would typically be, it could be a couple of ways. One would be high-powered DC fast chargers where people can get a quick fueling, and that didn't used to be feasible, but the newer generation electric vehicles have much faster charging capabilities. So for example, once upon a time it was the luxury vehicles like the Porsche Taycan and the Audi e-tron, but now Hyundais and Kias have the ability to charge at over 150 kilowatts, which means they can get a full charge in about 30 minutes. So technology to the rescue might be one way to do that. And that's certainly what the NEVI program is about, which is federal funding. That said, the other way to do it is, potentially right-of-way charging. And so we will probably include some information on how right-of-way charging can support this.
Yeah.
So, go ahead. Were you saying something first?
I was just going to say, you had a question about the destination where the people are working. So if you look at the service area, or the area of the study, we're on the very north end, right? And we're right close to Santa Cruz. I think there's a reason why Santa Cruz has so many Tesla supercharge stations, is because so many people work in Silicon Valley, just north of us, and drive over the hill in their nice car. So
yeah,
and that's also the case for us. That's a huge magnet. We're a bedroom community for the Silicon Valley. So.
And Regina, in addition to that, I just heard that Santa Cruz is one of the wealthiest per capita counties. And so, that makes total sense, because they might be in a better position to buy, electric vehicles, as they tend to be, not all, but a little bit more costly. But that's just another observation.
Yeah, and to kind of add to that, if you look at our household income for San Benito County, it's actually significantly high. but that's because so many people are those super commuters commuting into the Silicon Valley. And unfortunately, the people that live and work locally, there's a huge gap. The income gap is significant. I don't know, I'm not saying that you guys have the answers for that, but just so you have some awareness of our community, just to kind of know that difference.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense given the fact that cost of living is lower in San Benito County and there's incredible high-paid jobs just on the other side of the hill. So, providing charging access to these folks would certainly allow them to have electric vehicles. I want to bring this slide back up because again, it shows how many chargers there are in this wealthy Santa Cruz County relative to San Benito County. But I know that a lot of Silicon Valley employers do provide public charging. In fact, Tesla, is one of them. They're located there, and so I have friends who also commute to Silicon Valley from long distances, and they drive EVs for the same reason. So yeah, if you could share with us that data, or if it's compiled into a study, would I think be very helpful and helping inform the recommendations that we make.
So
Yes,
there
most
was
definitely.
one thing I wanted to mention or respond to, and then I wanted to ask a clarifying question. So I know we talked about, you mentioned EVs not being good in stop and go traffic. And I don't know if that was in reference to like, you're not going to stop in the middle of your commute and charge, obviously. But as far as just driving them, EVs are actually better in stop and go traffic. They actually have higher, they're kind of reversed with, quote, fuel efficiency from an ICE vehicle, so an internal combustion vehicle. So they actually get better mileage in stop and go traffic because they have the regenerative braking. And also when you're stopped in traffic, the car essentially turns off, like the motor's not running.
Okay. For some reason, when some of the training I've been to for like, maybe it's different for buses, they talk about how the more aggressive driving of a bus will like kill your battery life. So maybe it's different for a bus. So maybe I just assume the same for a passenger vehicle. So
that's interesting because I actually worked on the sides of a project where we electrified a bus. And there's a county here in Washington that, and in our county, we're experiencing like really bad mileage with the buses. And they were like, what's going on? There's another county in Everett that electrified their buses years ago. And they actually did driver training and for how to drive it. And it was, don't stomp on the, not the gas, the accelerator. Little behavioral tweaks. And they saw massive increases in mileage. So that was really interesting, but it's just like it also is just like a gas car where if you are an aggressive driver, then obviously you're going to see lower, but like my car, I have an electric car. It actually has like adaptive cruise control. So in stop and go traffic, I turn it on and I just kind of hang out and the car does it for me, which is amazing. And I just have a Nissan Leaf. I don't have a Tesla. But so I just wanted to mention that like they're actually more efficient in stop and go as long as you're not like, stomping.
I guess I think I was just assuming like that comment you said about the significance of that driver training for getting that efficiency for your electric vehicle. So
but the braking, you actually regen and get energy back.
Okay, so maybe I get the aggressive acceleration is maybe where it can kill the battery is what I was thinking. Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, no problem. And then I wanted to ask a clarifying question because you said it won't do anything for the traffic itself. Now, were you thinking more like, we need more transit and get people out of their cars is an issue we need to look at?
Yeah. So one of the things that I mentioned was, with congestion, I mean, I think in San Benito County, because we have so many people just commuting, we want to be able to provide, I don't know. The challenge again is that as people are leaving town and they're already having the 90-minute plus commute time, what can we do? But I think it was mentioned that, charging at their work site could be an option.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Silicon Valley is not within our study area. So it's not something that is, I think we should address it, but it's not something we can they're hopefully doing their own evaluation of this kind of thing. So.
Yeah, and I think maybe what Veronica's kind of comment there is also kind of pointing out, I think people have a misperception that electric vehicles are gonna be like the magic wand. Like, obviously there's still the infrastructure of like there's almost so much capacity on the road, like, you know what I mean? So I think it's easy for people to we've been kind of sold this bill that like, oh yeah, this is gonna answer all of our problems. And that's that's obviously totally outside of what you guys are doing. So, making that clear.
I believe electric vehicles are the magic wand, but those electric vehicles are buses.
Yes, thank you.
So battery or fuel cell electric buses we need to electrify transportation, and we need to increase the efficiency of the system.
Yes.
And the best way to do that is through transit.
Yeah, it's definitely not an either or solution.
Yeah, it's a both. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, so let's see. We're starting to talk a little bit about incentives. Are there specific incentives that you can think of that have been discussed, perhaps, that we should be aware of? Recommendations.
I would have to rely on Veronica on that because she's been more on the passenger vehicle side of the little bit of electrification that's been discussed in the community.
Yeah, gosh, not that I can really think of. I mean, I know we get, tax incentives and, but other than that, I mean, cash incentives are always good, not necessarily cash, but vouchers and things of that sort. Monetary is always a good incentive, right? But other than that, I don't have anything else that I can think of.
So let's flip that question around and see, are there disincentives that currently exist that should be removed?
I guess the disincentive would be that most people think, well, now I have to buy a new car and I wasn't ready to make that purchase. And so just the whole transitioning into, EV and getting people to think about, when they're thinking about their next car purchase, how they're going to go about doing that. And I think part of that is having that educational component as far as, as people get ready to purchase a new car, what are the benefits for going electric EV?
Yeah, and maybe if I could add to that, like Veronica's saying, the education, there's just so many questions. And I know obviously there's already plenty of resources. If we could collect all the important resources that very clearly what it's going to take to transition to an electric vehicle. I know another thing I personally worry about is the confidence I have in PG&E service. But again, that's totally outside of your guys's. You guys don't have the answers for that, but that's definitely a question I have. Of like, God forbid that there's a natural disaster and I have a giant paperweight, basically.
Right. And Regina, the other, thing, and I'll have to expose myself here a little bit, but I recently purchased a car. I was thinking of buying a electric vehicle, but I ended up deciding not to go that route because, and maybe for me it was the security issue of having to charge at a public facility. As a woman, I just didn't feel safe to be there waiting 30 minutes and then having that uncertainty as to when I needed to charge, and just kind of planning all of that accordingly. I don't have the luxury of charging at where I live, so that was the biggest hurdle for me to deciding not to go EV.
Yeah, and
if you had chargers at your office, would you be more secure about it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. If we had charging at the office, but then, on the weekends, obviously I would usually like to go out of town. And so, and I know there's, I can plan ahead and do that, but it's just being at night. I just, maybe it was just a mental thing for me that I didn't want to be caught in a situation where it's expected that people are charging, and I don't know, there's people that are looking out for these people that are charging, and maybe they're looking for people to they could be a victim of some sort. I don't know, but maybe it's just a me thing. But I don't know if other people or women have expressed that concern. But for me, that was a main thing. It's just my own personal security.
Yeah, and I was just thinking when I made the comment about the PG&E, I guess the idea of a microgrid, because that's even something that I think about for if we were to move to zero emission going electric for our buses, is I want to know that there is some sort of infrastructure, because we are mandated to evacuate people if there's a natural disaster as the public transit operator. So having that backup, but obviously that could then be extended to obviously personal vehicles too. So like some sort of microgrid planning in our community, I think would be beneficial.
And this is
These are great suggestions, by the way, and also insights. We appreciate these perspectives. I think, Veronica, your point about personal safety is probably very much on the minds of a lot of buyers. And I suspect it's not something people necessarily discuss. So thank you for your candor, because I think this is exactly the kind of information that's relevant. The last question is, reducing barriers. And I think the barrier, the perceived personal safety is a fundamental human need. And that's not something that technology has yet solved. We are moving toward faster and faster charging speeds. There's now a megawatt charging standard, and in the I can't remember if we talked about it in the existing conditions report or not. I don't think we did, because when we wrote it, they hadn't finalized the megawatt charging standard. So that was developed for trucks, but I suspect that at some point we'll see that for light duty vehicles as well. And that will essentially replicate the fueling experience that we have for an ICE vehicle. But, we're not there yet, but probably in 3 years, 5 years time, we'll be there.
And this is Amory from MBAG. On the whole resiliency front, as part of the planning grants, Caltrans has a $50 million allocation to do specifically adaptation-focused planning grants. And one of the things that you could study with those planning grants is exactly that question of energy resiliency for EV charging infrastructure. And there could be a lot of work done around that in our region, especially around like wildfire areas and those types of things.
Great, thank you. Yes.
And on our fleet projects, we almost always address that, because for the same reason. When PG&E, when the wind blows, PG&E kills the power. When the power is out, how do I charge my fleet? If you're operating a police department, you better have access to some form of stored energy. And so we typically address that. With public charging, it's a little different. And so, but I think, we should probably have similar kinds of provisions. So I think in the plan, we should probably discuss that as well. Okay. All right. Let's see, where are we? Question, I think we've talked a little bit about question 5, which is advice regarding more EV travel and reducing barriers. You guys have both been talking about the vehicle side. I'd like to kind of switch a little bit and talk about the charging infrastructure side. So are there incentives or disincentives and barriers with regard to chargers that we haven't yet discussed?
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't have anything.
Okay.
Regina?
Yeah, I'm curious and my apologies that we run so thin around here that we're not necessarily always keeping up with the latest. But I'd be curious, Veronica, when you were doing any kind of development reviews, do they have discussions about, like, for the city of Hollister or the county, like the fact that they have to have EV infrastructure built, for development or anything? I'd be curious if there's
it's not required, but it could be considered like a mitigation, like an air quality mitigation. So I have seen some companies propose that, but they provide preferred, parking, things of that sort. But
I'd be curious how much of a carrot or stick is the land use side taking care of the type of infrastructure requirement, or
Sure. Yeah, no, it's a recommendation. If a development provides it, great. If not, I don't think the city
is requiring it
mandates
necessarily.
that. Correct. Yeah.
So for new construction, it certainly is, most reach codes are addressing that now, because it's there's obviously a need for it, but the need today is much less than the need tomorrow. We know that EV adoption, for example, in the United States, 5% of vehicles sold last year were electric, which sounds like a very tiny fragment, but it sounds a little different when you think the year before it was only 2.5%. So essentially EV sales doubled year over year in 1 year. In several doublings from now, which are most likely to happen for a couple of reasons, the demand for chargers, especially residential charging, is going to skyrocket. We're starting to see demand now from existing developments that want to retrofit. It's a very expensive. It's the most expensive way to add capacity is retrofitting, because typically the electrical systems were sized for a certain load. And so when you're starting to add a load in places that never existed before, like a parking lot or a parking garage, suddenly that creates a real technical challenge. It's much more cost effective to add a larger service panel and add sufficient conduit when you're building the building. So your developer, the developers are going to resent, regulators for imposing these requirements today, but 5 years from now, they'll say, well, that was actually a pretty good idea.
Yeah, good point.
Okay. I think we've kind of walked through all of the different questions. I'll read them again, which is basically, what charging infrastructure investments are planned. We discussed that, and I think, it doesn't sound like there's a lot specific. We talked about some incentives and some disincentives, especially on the vehicle side. We talked about other alternatives to funding and some interesting barriers. Are there any other suggestions, thoughts, or questions that you might have?
Nothing's coming to mind for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, same here. But thank
Okay.
you. Thank you for, this has been very insightful, and, anything that we can do to, support the effort, please let us know.
Well, I think the first thing would be, any data on travel patterns. I just think that's going to help. Clearly it's San Benito County is in a unique situation with regard to those super commuters. By the way, what is county number 1 if San Benito County is number 2? What's county number 1?
San Joaquin County.
Oh, interesting. I wasn't even aware of that. We're actually working right now on a project very much like this for San Joaquin County, but that project isn't quite as far along.
Gotta put that little note in there. The source is Veronica Lozama, transportation planner from San Benito COG. Get our name in that.
I'll send you the info. I'll send out the info.
Okay, great. Well, that's good. That is helpful to know. I'm amazed. Frankly, one of the things about California that amazes me as a non-Californian is the concept of super. We don't even have that term here in Washington.
Yeah.
But I know that we did a study for UC Davis, and UC Davis has some insanely crazy long commuting distances, and that we see. We've done work for other campuses around the state, and that's not uncommon. So there's a real need, and I do think again, there's a perception that electric vehicles are luxury goods that are for the rich, and on a first cost basis, that's the case. But if you're driving 90 minutes, each way to work, the cost differential is probably, an EV would pay for itself in a relatively quick amount of time. I personally, I don't drive an EV. Why? Because I never drive. I put maybe 5,000 miles on, so it would take me a decade to be breaking even. But if I drove 90 minutes each way, that would be a very different equation.
Yeah, it's interesting. This is Emery from MBAG. Recent EV owner purchaser, myself. A key insight I think that's really struck me is just how many dealerships are charging markups to essentially recoup the federal incentive. We are becoming hard pressed in our region to find dealers that don't charge $7,500 extra for the privilege of buying an EV.
Yeah,
So
it's
Dirty.
and I'll say I've seen that as a recent issue up here in Washington as well, because there is a shortage of EVs because with gas prices, they've become very popular. I was looking at potentially purchasing a new EV, and I literally couldn't find. I was looking for a VW i4, and literally couldn't find one. Like there just weren't
Yeah.
any. And then every now and then, because now I'm on some list, they'll email me and they'll tell me in the email, there's a dealer markup of $5,000. Like what?
Capitalism again, always rearing its ugly head.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's a somewhat I mean, I've seen that recently. Like I didn't have any issues when I bought mine 4 years ago. So my hope is that it's temporary.
Right. And I will say this is sort of as someone who purchased one and sort of talking to a lot of folks, there's that. And then there's also the fact that there's a lot of incentives available, but you have to apply for them separately. And a good example is like in Monterey, there's 3 incentives of $2,000 each. So if you know about the incentives, you can apply for them. But even as someone who works in the industry and sort of is very keenly aware of all the incentives, I had to sort of go through this process. And so I can't imagine that someone who's just pressed for time, has a day job where it's not their area of expertise, they would have a lot of trouble finding all of that information. And I think that
That's a
really,
good point. That's a
yeah.
very good point.
That's a good disincentive to note.
I hope you are noting it, Sarah. That's a
Yes.
really good point. It ties into several of these different questions. And Mari, thank you for your insights. And you're right. We see this all the time. The F-150 Lightning is the game changer especially for fleets, right? Because if you look at the average fleet, it's probably 50 to 60% pickup trucks. So and for years, our fleet clients have been saying, I can't electrify because there's no electric pickups, and what am I going to get? A Tesla, Cybertruck? And then suddenly Ford actually produced a product that they could use, and then pulled the rug out from underneath them because they basically said they stopped taking orders because demand was 5 times supply. And then,
but I also heard that they were failing and that they wouldn't back up people who purchased them, because we just recently had we did some groundbreaking on a new highway road in our community anyway, and they were saying that they had some Ford trucks that failed. They turned to Ford and say, hey, what's going on? They're like, I can't help you. I don't know what to tell you. So I don't know if that was just his opinion of it or if that's like an ongoing issue that Ford's experiencing. So
I hadn't heard that, but probably because there haven't been enough actually delivered. In general, I've always taken the attitude of, do I want to be somebody else's guinea pig with a new product, new technology? And so that is,
and that's transit. We're being put as the guinea pigs for it all here.
Yes, all transit agencies in California are being forced to doing that. We're doing a big transit agency electrification project here in Washington State, and it's 1,400 buses, including 60-foot coaches, which it is. You're right. It's new. Remember, we're at the beginning of a major industrial change. We're in the disruptive phase of the industry. We're seeing battery technologies continuously being redesigned. A lot of it is being funded across the mountains from you in Silicon Valley with venture capital funds that are pushing the industry. But we're going to see a lot of change over the next several years. And so technologies that we have today will be obsolete very quickly. And that's both true on the charging side as well as on the battery side.
We're building the plane as we fly.
Pretty much. Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, anything else? If not, is Sarkis still on the call?
I think he had to get off a little early.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Maya, is there any closing remarks that you'd like to make before we wrap up?
Just thanks everyone for joining us. I know you have busy schedules. This has helped a lot, I think Mike can say. We appreciate all your insight.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Mike, did you want to go over schedule, like the rest of the schedule?
Yeah, and before I do, I'll just put in one more plug for Social Pinpoint, and take a look at the existing conditions report. And again, very shortly, we'll have the transit existing conditions report as well. And that, I think, Regina, will be very insightful for you. And we would love your comments on it. If there's things that you're considering or questions, we want to make sure that gets addressed. Again, the focus for this project is more on interregional travel, but that does include transit. So if there are opportunities, and I don't know, I can't remember, to be honest, if you run service to Silicon Valley or long distance, But that would be, that would be a good example.
We
of
can, we
where-
have an inter-county route that goes from Hollister through San Juan Bautista into Gilroy. So we do connect with like VTA
Okay,
and
so
Caltrain.
that's probably a very long distance, and therefore that would be.
It's about a half-hour drive.
Okay,
It's not
all right.
too long, but enough that, we have to think about it for sure.
Yeah, depending on the type of coach, most buses can handle at least an hour of service on a battery.
Mhm.
What we're seeing a lot of transit agencies doing, by the way, is a mixture of battery buses and fuel cell buses. So fuel cell for the long distance. This only works though if they can get if they either have enough service that can justify the investment in fuel cell fueling infrastructure, or they can collaborate with other transit agencies and share that, because fuel cell fueling infrastructure is pretty pricey. All right. Well, let's see. So Sarah, you want to talk a little bit about the schedule and then we'll wrap up. Uh-oh. I caught her at a bad time. So
Gosh,
anyway,
terrible timing.
so while she gets her breath,
Well, she collects herself, yes.
so this project wraps in the spring. We're trying to gather this information before the end of the year so that we can complete our analysis. We're also doing our own, we're doing there's a data gathering part of the study using transportation data from Streetlight, which is a origin destination data, which will help identify some sites as well. So we're going to take that data that's collected from our big data source, combine that with the input that we're getting from you and from our own observations, and put together the recommendations. And so we're trying to get this part of the analysis wrapped up by the end of the year so we can move forward and finalize it by early 2023. And this is what it looks like.
So yes, things have shifted a little bit because this was our schedule early from the proposal. So, once kickoff actually happens, things actually shift a little bit, but you can kind of see the visualization of the process here.
All right. Any other questions before we wrap?
No, thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, back at you. Thank you for your help, and we look forward to getting these documents wrapped with your support.
Fantastic.
All right.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
Have a nice rest of your day.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.